This episode of Does It Hold Up is brought to you by Haunt Manor, Canada's largest haunted attraction. Just west of Lundy's Lane's historic graveyard, where one of the bloodiest battles in history took place, this experience will chill you to the bone. With a haunted hayride, creepy corn maze, and 7 different haunted houses, you may want to consult with a doctor before going to make sure your heart can take it. 9387 Lundy's Lane in Niagara Falls. Welcome to the Mason Guard Show. Unscripted, uncensored, unapologetic. Hello, Internet. Welcome once again to the Mason Guard Show. I'm Scott Mason.
And I'm Edward Guard.
And we are back once more with Does It Hold Up, our show where we take a look at movies from the past and see whether or not they are still any good to an audience here in 2019. And to kick off our horror month, we have picked a iconic, I think, horror movie from 2004. We are talking about Saw.
Saw, what a great movie. I mean, this was an interesting one for me. I actually remember this movie because I actually saw it in the theater.
Oh, nice.
Right when it came out. So, you know, it came out in 2004, right before Halloween. I remember actually taking my buddy to see this movie, and we were just blown away because we didn't really know what to expect. It wasn't advertised that much before this came out.
No.
Really low-budget movie. So, for me, it was kind of a real surprise when we sat down to watch this movie.
Yeah, I think, certainly we didn't know what to expect because this movie was directed by James Wan. This is his feature film debut. Of course, James Wan has gone on to some absolutely incredible movies. The first 2 movies in both the Insidious and Conjuring series, which are fantastic. He did Furious 7 from the Fast and Furious franchise, and most recently, I think the big one is Aquaman from DC. So that was a great movie.
Yeah, I think he's actually been booked to Aquaman 2 as well, which is going to be interesting. I mean, I found out a few interesting things about this movie. Now, James Wan and Lee Whannell, they were friends through film school, and when they came out of school, they wanted to make a movie together, but knew they were going to have no budget to do it. So they actually planned to make a film that they could film all in one room, and that spawned this Saw movie, which turned into a huge franchise. Now, with that said, when you look at this movie, it had a budget of $1.2 million, which is a drop in the hat.
That's a small budget for 2004.
Now, Wan making this movie knew he had no budget, so he actually deferred any payment and planned to take a percentage of the profits of this movie, which is a huge risk for a director, a new director, which could flop. But this movie made domestically $56 million and worldwide $103 million. So, what a return on this type of movie.
That's amazing.
Some other interesting facts. They filmed this whole movie in 18 days.
That's crazy. Less than 3 weeks to make an entire feature film.
Absolutely. And you've got a cast, a very small cast in this. Cary Elwes, Lee Whannell, obviously he plays the Adam character, Danny Glover, Michael Emerson, Shawnee Smith. A really small amount of people to make a really low-budget film. They filmed it in 18 days. The whole bathroom scene was filmed in 6 days. They filmed it in chronological order to let the characters know the sort of order so they could stay with the story as it progressed. So really interesting method of making a movie and really short time frame to do so, which I found incredible.
I was reading that even some of the scenes that we see in the movie were the first rehearsal, the first time they're kind of reading the lines together. They actually filmed the rehearsals, and a lot of that ended up actually making it into the movie. So I think that's fascinating. I think that contributes to that 18 days. But again, just a truly remarkable feat in filmmaking alone, regardless of the quality of the movie, just what they were able to do in 18 days on a budget of $1.2 million. Remarkable.
Yeah, I found it really interesting as well that you could do that they were able to achieve this. I found another funny fact that Cary Elwes Elwes actually sued the production after the fact because he was promised 1% of profits, and when he realized that this movie had made over $100 million, he went after it. He didn't win that suit, and he actually wasn't involved involved in the franchise after that until much later because of that conflict. But that's all kind of like major sort of trivia facts that I found. What do you remember about this movie? Like, what were you thinking before you pressed play?
So I remember the first time I saw this movie, it blew me away. I thought this was a really unique movie. I hadn't seen anything kind of like it before. Obviously, we've seen what's happened to the Saw franchise since. I'm not a fan generally of the direction it took. I think, it picked up on the wrong parts of what made this movie popular, and it thought it was about the gore and the torture and just made its own genre of movie, basically, as a result. But for me, I remember really liking this one. I can't remember if I saw it in theaters or whether it was a home video release when I did finally see it, but I remember just being absolutely enthralled at a very unique story. Some great performances. I particularly remember Cary Elwes in particular, just really, really liking him. And of course, the twist and all the kind of the fun turns that the story takes throughout is what I kind of remembered.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned, I went to see this in theaters and was blown away. Basically, other than Cary Elwes, there's no really, and Danny Glover, there isn't much of a cast. And, Lee Whannell, I'd never heard of this guy, never seen him in anything. I don't think you'll see him in anything after.
Else.
Now, Juan and Lee Whannell actually got together to make this film. They actually made a short film called Saw to get people interested in this concept. And that short film, which is about 9 minutes in length, is basically the scene with the Amanda character, Shawnee Smith, but performed by Lee Whannell. Like,
right, that's the iconic scene that everyone thinks of.
Yeah, the reverse bear trap.
The reverse bear trap, exactly.
Yeah, funny enough, they actually had to build the reverse bear trap, and they were doing this as just, people, not famous, no
right.
budget. So they actually built one of these bear traps that actually was a legit reverse bear trap, and he actually had to put it in his mouth, and it was rusty, and he got cut by it. Really terrible things that happened to make this short film. But it was enough to get people to give them that budget of $1.2 million to make this movie. Other than that, this movie, although it's considered one of the beginnings of a term that I hate, which is torture porn.
Torture porn, gore porn, whatever your term is.
This isn't my genre. I don't really like horror movies, but I do like thriller movies. And it's hard this one's a difficult one because I categorize it as thriller. They didn't really focus on the gore, on the torture. It was just about that intense feeling you get throughout this movie. Anyways.
Yeah. Again, I think it birthed the genre, but it is not actually a member of the genre itself, which I find very interesting.
Yeah, and I know that Lee Whannell and James Wan are really uncomfortable with where it went after the fact. They don't like that they're attributed to the beginning of this fad that became torture porn.
Whole new genre.
I would like to call out that, although I can't prove this, I do believe that this is probably responsible for the escape room trend.
I also think that, absolutely. I was thinking that watching this movie, I'm like, man, they should do a real Saw-themed escape room where you're chained to a pipe and you have to really rely on the other person. I'm like, that would be such a great escape room.
Yeah, so I actually looked into this a little bit. The first sort of escape room games started to come out in 2004. I think the first actual escape room was 2004 or maybe 2007. I can't remember the exact date, but I genuinely believe that this birthed that as well. And if you're going to take something away, if you're rather than be the creator of torture porn, be the creator of escape rooms, right?
I think that's a pretty safe thing to say. All right, why don't we jump right into it? Of course, as you guys know, we take a look at a few different categories as we review the movies. Our first one is where we look at the story, script, performances, and as we go through, we'll kind of talk about some points that, jumped out at us. So, as far as the cast goes, again, you've heard the names already. Lee Whannell plays Adam, Cary Elwes plays Lawrence. You have Danny Glover playing Tap the detective, and his partner Ken Luong, who is Sing, and then Michael Emerson, who plays Zepp, are just a few of the kind of key characters that I do want to call out. I really do like a lot of the performances in this, but my question as I watch this today is, who the fuck is the protagonist of this movie? Who are you supposed to be cheering for?
I think Danny Glover?
Is it?
I don't know. The whole performance by Danny Glover is weird in this movie. It feels like an afterthought, but they need it to kind of summarize the whole movie. But I think he's the protagonist because he does save the wife and daughter.
Right. I thought that, but again, he's got kind of like the weird ending, and there's that middle part where you think that he's the killer. I just think they do some really weird things with every single character so that this might actually not have a protagonist, which is a weird thing for me.
So one of the weird things for me about this movie, and I don't like it when they do it in films, is that they took their villain and they didn't make him a character. They concealed his identity and made you think he was a few different people, but your villain actually isn't a character. He doesn't get a story arc. You don't understand truly why he is the way he is. I understand that maybe in the other movies that I didn't really go on to see. Did you watch the rest of this franchise?
I saw 2 and maybe 3, and then recently actually ended up seeing Jigsaw.
Okay, so I think I stopped at 2, and then maybe 3 was on the background at someone's house. I maybe watched 5 minutes of, but again, not my favorite genre. So does it go out to explain why the hell?
Oh yeah, I mean, it really dives deep into a mythos, especially actually the Jigsaw movie kind of really explores his motives, and I mean, 3 brings back Amanda as a helper, and there's a lot of weird things kind of through the mythos that follows from the 7, 8, I think it is, Saw movies at this point. And none of them actually really connect with what he's trying to accomplish in this one. Like, they really build Jigsaw up through the subsequent films to be a character, but you're right. In this one, he's just a body on the floor, basically.
Yeah, he doesn't
Spoilers.
really. Yeah, he doesn't really have a character. He's not really a character, and that's what bothers me. That he doesn't actually. He isn't the villain because you don't know anything about him. He just has like the few moments throughout the story, and that's the problem for me with this. I mean, there's another few interesting things that happen in the story, like for example, the whole cigarette dying scene.
Yeah, I like that one.
Apparently, there was a scene that was cut out that when they turn off the lights, they actually use the hacksaws to cut through a pipe, and then they're whispering to each other through the pipe, and no one can hear that. But they actually decided to cut that out of the movie because if they could cut through a pipe, then maybe they could cut through the chains,
they cut
and
through
it
their
didn't make
chains?
sense,
Yeah.
right? So probably a good choice there, but it also doesn't. It makes that scene unrealistic. Like, why would that work, right?
Yeah, why couldn't they hear what was being said? Because they could hear there was clearly a mic in the room, but that somehow didn't pick up that plan.
I mean, another major problem I have with this movie is you're in this room for basically 7 hours. I think it starts around 11 o'clock.
To 6, yeah,
Till
is
6,
the time.
right? And then,
Yeah.
everything crazy happens. But you're sitting there for 7 hours. You don't notice the dude in front of you who's like a couple feet from you breathing. That doesn't happen. And another sort of major flaw I have with this movie is it's all very contrived, and this guy's supposed to be, a psychopathic serial killer, madman genius. He must be. What if anything went wrong, right? So, like, what if, for example, Adam broke his tape, or Lawrence broke his tape, or they broke the tape recorder when they were trying to grab it, or couldn't figure out how to grab it.
They couldn't get to the tapes. Yeah.
What happens then? So, 4 hours in, this guy's lying in the middle of the floor. What does he do? Get up like, well, guys, this is sort of, not the way I saw this working.
Sorry, let me just pass you this tape recorder so you can press play.
I'm just going to sit over here in this corner, and then I don't really understand the whole thing with his key on that little glow chain.
That's the one I wanted to talk about, because there's the perfect example of what ifs, right? Like, was that supposed to be, within his grasp that he could free himself right away? Like, is that how that was supposed to play out? Because that's what it was, right? Like, so he had his key on him. I was reading in Saw 3, apparently there is a scene where we actually see Amanda setting this whole scenario up.
Okay.
And there's some explanation in there that she does something to kind of sabotage it in hopes that the key will vanish down the drain. But it's like, that's a lot of what ifs. And I think that's my problem, is so many of these plans rely on a lot of what ifs that could very easily have turned the other direction.
Yeah, very small things. Like, I don't understand why Adam didn't drown in the bathtub. Like, he's clearly like underwater.
Unconscious.
Yeah, like, which like what? how does that work, right? Another thing about, we're talking about Amanda really quickly. I found it really interesting that James Wan actually had a crush on Shawnee Smith.
Yes,
so they had
he
had a conversation with the guy doing, or the woman doing casting, and he threw her name out like at random. They contacted her and got her for the movie. I just thought that was like a fun
awesome
little fact. I mean, the story. If you
on that note, by the way, if Josie Dye is listening, we'd love to have you on our show.
Josie Dye, we love you. Okay. All right. Well, a couple other pieces of this story. If you don't know this story, it is basically an escape room. Two guys that get trapped in a room. They don't know why, and it plays out from there. Fundamentally, there's a lot of issues with the story. Another one, I know we've called it a few, but I just want to call this one out. So Adam plays this like PI sort of photographer who's following this guy for a couple of days. How exactly did they plan all of this stuff with Adam? So first of all, Danny Glover hires Adam a few days before to follow this guy, right? How do they know about Adam? How do they figure out how to get him in there? All in like a 2-day span? Because this is a really well thought out plan. So like in 2 days, they concocted this whole thing?
Well, I mean, we do see... he had this bathroom plan way back when, right? Because Danny Glover breaks into his apartment in the first hunt, and he sees the design for the bathroom thing. So I think that's in place, and he was just waiting for the right victims. Is kind of how you can write that one away. I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, I think if you get wrapped up in the plot holes of this movie, it will fall apart.
Yeah, it does.
I think this is one where you have to have some suspension of disbelief. I think we've harped on this enough. Let's try to find some positives in here. For me, I really like the moment when they do wake up. And Adam is like looking around for scars, and did they do this? They took my kidneys, and then especially when Elwes follows that up with, if that was the case, then no, you'd be in horrible pain and you'd be laying on the ground screaming. So I really like the way that plays out. There's a scene that I did feel was off-putting, where you get kind of that reveal of Mrs. Gordon. Allie, I forget what her name is.
Could be Annie.
And Diana the child, where he's holding the gun and listening to the daughter's heartbeat. Yeah, It's a weird scene. I was actually reading that originally this was a scene where Zepp was supposed to be going through the wife's intimates. Yes. And they felt that was
too far.
Too far, and I'm glad they kind of did. But I still think that moment sticks out as a sore thumb, is again why... Once you have the reveal at the end that Zepp isn't actually a psycho, he's just another person wrapped up in this game, why he did that. And that just didn't make any sense to me. But in the moment, I do love that scene. I think it's terrifying, and it really raises kind of the stakes and shows you that, there's a madman behind this. But again, once you get that reveal, then this logic kind of falls apart a bit.
I guess when he decided he's going to kill them and he understands that that's his purpose, he's just lost it.
He's going to go full creep with it.
Yeah, I'm just going to go as crazy as possible.
Right into it.
Yeah, and that guy is just Emerson's just a creepy looking dude.
So I was actually, this is one of the things I wrote down, is why do they keep casting this guy to be a creep? Like in Lost, in this one, I feel like the child could have overpowered him. Like he just doesn't look like that intimidating of a threat to me. Yeah, he looks kind of weird and off-putting, but like he doesn't strike me as someone who would truly ever be threatening, I guess maybe with the pig mask on, that's it. But but he doesn't even have that when he abducts them. Like he's just in her closet.
He's just in a blanket.
In a blanket.
For weird.
That looks so silly.
Yeah. There's a couple of interesting things. A couple of things in the movie that actually kind of give away things if you're paying close attention. Mm-hmm. The scene that he's in the hospital, there's actually a blueprint for the reverse bear trap on the table. So if you're paying close attention, you might have picked up who the actual villain is. And another one is that the revolver on the ground that he supposedly shot himself with is an empty gun. Now, Canadians, you probably don't know much about guns, and neither do I, but revolvers don't release their casings. So that gun, there would be a casing in that revolver. So when it's an empty gun, when he picks it up, that kind of would give away that guy did not shoot himself.
Yeah, if you were, of the right mind, which of course he had just hacked off his foot, so maybe he wasn't thinking about where are the shell casings.
That could be true. That could be true. With that said, there was a couple of script things that I found funny, although it would be off-putting that someone would be trying to make jokes or be witty in that situation from from the Adam character. My last girlfriend was a feminist, vegan, punk who broke up with me because she thought I was too mad or whatever that was, too angry. I thought that was a funny line. And the other one I found funny is, I don't care if you covered yourself in peanut butter and had a 15 hooker gangbang. Just like, wow.
Yeah, it certainly gives you, again, an idea for who the Adam character is. And I think, again, that makes him unlikable and clearly not the protagonist. So he's not, Cary Elwes isn't. I don't think Danny Glover is. Just this weird no protagonist movie. Again, we've harped on this a lot, but kind of where do you land for story? Because for me, again, I struggle to actually take away a lot. Yeah, there's the plot holes, but I suspension of disbelief over a lot of this movie. So I actually land on a 3 for story script on this one. Again, I don't think there's anything nowadays that feels revolutionary. I do remember back then a lot of this was. But now watching it, I just think this is kind of just an average script that takes, some fun twists and turns. Nothing horrible, nothing great.
Yeah, I felt the same way. Looking at this from the perspective that this is basically an indie movie from two unknown, director and writer, it was pretty great. And I fell on a 3. Back then I probably would have put this at a 5 for story because it was crazy. Looking at it a critical eye, I feel like I tear it apart because of so many holes.
It's what we do now.
But at the end of the day, I fell on a 3 because this is a creative story. I don't like to put it in the horror genre. I put this in the thriller genre, and I fell on a 3 as well.
All right, great. Well, let's move on to our second category then. Of course, this is where we talk about the aesthetic of the film, the look, the shots, some of the visual effects and things like that. One thing I want to call out right away, actually, is there's some great stuff in the camera work. You can see why James Wan went on to such a successful career. In particular, the choice of Adam's camera being freehand, shaky cam to kind of give his sense. Well, Dr. Gordon's was all set up, tripod. It was steady. It was sometimes at a weird angle, just to be slightly off-putting, but it was always a steady shot, right? Just to show their different frames of mind. I thought that was just such a subtle little touch, but it really does pay off in the final product of the movie.
Yeah, interesting enough, I actually wrote that down as well, because when I was watching this, I noted it, because I saw it straight away, and I was like, wow, that's... it's interesting that they're using the actual shots to display the emotion that these guys are going through. Adam, very sporadic, where as the Dr. Lawrence or Carrie is actually very calm about it. He's trying to figure out solutions. And,
methodical, like you would be in surgery. When things are going wrong, you need to have that calm brain. And again, I think that's what that demonstrates, is he has that calmness even in the face of absolute insanity.
Absolutely. I mean, there's another couple of interesting things that I had taken down for the aesthetic. Like, you have to keep in mind that this entire movie is filmed in one warehouse. They move things around and set the scenes up. This is all filmed,
one building.
One building. So nothing's outside. Even the car chase scene at the end is done in a warehouse without the lights. Those cars aren't moving. They just have the lights off and they're shaking the car.
Dude sitting in the back bouncing on the bumper,
It's just crazy. Because when you're watching that scene, it's such a weird car chase scene. And I remember being like, this is unusual. And then seeing it this time, I'm like, oh, way to go. Like, way to really lower the, lower the budget on that scene.
It's so much creativity. Another shot I want to call out is just fantastic filmmaking is in Adam's flashback, where he's going through the dark place using his camera flash.
Oh, and the sound from the camera.
So good. Yeah, the way they do that, just, you get that little flash of light, and then there's that one where flash, and you see the pig face for just a second before it goes dark again. Oh, so well done. Again, James Wan really does have a really creative eye, and it shows in this one.
Absolutely. I also wanted to call out a few different things. This is the only Saw movie in the franchise that was not filmed in Toronto, which I found to be interesting.
Yeah.
The rest of them are all filmed here in Canada, in Toronto. Also, I found out that the Jigsaw character, like the little clown thing, was actually hand built by Wan himself.
That's cool.
Like, he actually made that thing, which was crazy. Like, how dedicated to that weird sort of clown are you, right? He actually himself made that.
And for that to become such an iconic symbol of the franchise, right? Like, he clearly did something right with that. I think if I'm going to talk about anything, I do think the torture scenes that you kind of get towards the beginning where he's talking about the past victims, right? They have the guy in the razor wire pen. You have the The second one, which is the weird one for me, the numbers on the wall where there's glass and he's covered in a flame. Like, was that one even meant to be possible? Like, there's no way he was meant to pass that one, right?
Know.
Which again just throws off the what is the Jigsaw's mentality and plan with all of this? Is he just trying to kill people, or is he truly trying to rehabilitate? The later Saws say, yeah, he's trying to make them better people, but this one, it's really clear that a lot of them is just meant to be a death trap.
Yeah, that's so. I heard that that's funny. The casting director actually cast her ex-husband for that role, which I found to be funny as well. The one that was
she just wanted to see him step on the glass.
Right? I found that funny.
And burn up.
Yeah, I also found out that Shawnee Smith, the one who plays Amanda, was actually wickedly sick with a fever above 100 when she was filming her scenes. I thought it was crazy that they carried on, but like it makes her look even worse.
It does, right? You could really see that in her. I think, and again, a lot of those does the quick cuts, the shaky cam. You know, kind of a lot of that filmmaking that was very popular in the early 2000s. So some of the aesthetic does feel dated, but there's so many smart choices that I think that does rise above. And still, even in 2019, there's going to be fresh takes. There's going to be things you see that you haven't really seen in other movies. So again, I think it really does... I think just James Wan deserves so much credit for the creativity of this movie and the aesthetic in it. So for me, I actually landed on a 4 when it comes to the aesthetic of this movie. Again, I just think there's a lot of creative things that are done. And on the budget that is done, this deserves that.
Yeah, I landed on a 3 for this one. There's a couple of uncomfortable scenes, like the whole scene with Shawnee Smith where she's in the reverse bear trap, and then you get that crazy camera as she's freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, you don't really need the crazy camera to express how freaked out she would be, but it was an interesting scene nonetheless. The other thing I wanted to call out, there was a throwback to Train Spotting. They actually put in the movie when he reaches into the dirty
you were going to call it.
I love Train Spotting,
but
I think that they threw that in there, which was great. And the last one I wanted to talk about was how good Lee Wannell's face at the end is when he's horrified, when it's all coming together and then that door's closing and you see him panicked. Mm-hmm. Really good, like really solid acting from him. I thought in that one scene he just did look terrified, so I thought that was good as well. So I landed on a 3 for the aesthetic. Again, nothing crazy. It is a low budget movie, so they had to stray away from showing too much or doing anything too crazy. Not bad, nothing amazing these days.
Fair, absolutely. I do get where you're coming from. Again, I just think there's enough in there that it still felt unique and fresh to me. So let's move on to soundtrack. I will admit right now, as I look at my notes, I literally didn't write down anything for soundtrack. There is not a lot of music to this movie. Again, I think a lot of that goes to the budget, right? It was very low budget. So you have, I guess, the end theme is probably about the only thing that people would recognize is that one Saw theme. But I don't have a lot at all to talk about when it comes to the soundtrack of this movie. Nothing jumped out at me. It really faded into the background for me.
I agree. I mean, the guy who composed the music, Charlie Closer, actually only had 3 weeks to put the music together for this movie, which is, the whole thing was done in 18 days. And of course, they only gave him 21 days to put an entire sound for a movie together. Obviously, the iconic music at the reveal at the end that becomes the theme of the rest of the show. Really well done. It's called Hello Zepp. It actually is misquoted because of this song that people quote that final reveal as him saying Hello Zepp. But he doesn't actually say that. He actually says Hello Mr. Hindle. Which is funny. I think the name of the song.
Or as they call you around the hospital, Zepp, right? They do go into that, yeah.
I think that's funny that because of that you get a misquote. But I think the tune Hello Zepp, super memorable. Not something you're going to hear on a very regular basis, but if you did hear it play right now, you would immediately think of this scene.
You would know it's the Saw music. I'll give you that. And that's why I couldn't give it a 1. Again, I don't want to jump the gun, I guess, on. Do you have anything else to add for soundtrack? Because again, I literally have nothing written down for this.
Absolutely.
Nothing jumped out at all.
The only other thing that I had noted was that scene that you mentioned where Adam's in his apartment and they use the sound of the flash recharge, which makes that scene really intense. Otherwise, I don't think it would have that same feeling. It's just that buzz sound of the recharge that just makes it incredible.
Very good call out.
Overall, I landed on a 2 because you did compose a great piece of music that is memorable. And the reveal music really makes that scene really great, but that was it. Nothing else memorable for me.
Yeah, I'm at a 2 again, simply because that song is iconic. Again, when the credits started rolling, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely do know this song. But it didn't even jump out at me until literally the credits were rolling and I had nothing to look at. So that's why I just didn't feel a very strong connection to it. But again, once that song did play, I did go, oh yeah, I know this theme. That does ring a bell. So now let's jump into our last category, and this is kind of where we get into the does it hold up, where we talk about the progressiveness. This movie was made 15 years ago now, so times have changed, sensibilities have changed. Ed, what did you kind of think about this? Was there any red alarm bells that you think maybe a modern audience would maybe get offended or not appreciate in the same level?
I mean, not much. Not much of anything. You've got a very small cast. You've got, a one-room movie, right? You've got Danny Glover, who I guess is the good guy, and,
and his partner.
And his partner.
Is Asian as well.
It's not like a whitewashed movie or anything.
No, and actually even the family that rescues the mother and the daughter at the end is a Middle Eastern family. Yeah. So again, just a touch where that didn't have to be, but they did make that choice. I think if I'm going to argue anything as far as a weakness goes, it's very much a male eye movie. This isn't made, this is made for guys. I think if you watch this movie, it would be tough to argue that, this was made with females in mind. It's very much a guy movie.
Yeah, I agree. I also, the only thing that I kind of thought about was the only one who really survived it was a woman, to show, constitution of a woman, I guess,
when her daughter's at risk, that's where she stepped up.
The mother stepped up, and then Amanda, she survived the actual trap because she was able to, overcome that horrible situation. I mean, I know the story goes on later to make her the worst human in existence, but, at the end of the day, I didn't feel like it made women feel weak or anything like that. So I really didn't have much. So when I don't have much, I land on a 3.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am as well. It's a 3 again. There's nothing that's going to offend. There's nothing that you're going to, cheer and applaud. It's forward thinking or anything like that. But yeah, it's safe for those of you who are looking for something like that. So now let's jump into the final category. Of course, this is where we talk about our overall enjoyment of the movie. As we always say, you could give 1s through all other categories and still find a 5 to be found here. So Ed, where did you kind of land on the overall excitement? What are your kind of wrap up your final thoughts here?
So I haven't seen this movie in a long time. I've seen it a couple of times. And I enjoyed it this watch through. I mean, I know that I've been pretty critical about the story, plot holes, etc. I just didn't, there's nothing crazy about this movie. There's nothing really amazing, but it is a good little thriller. It didn't blow me away, but I did enjoy it. And when I look at this section, will I ever watch this movie again? I mean, probably not in the near future, but I might watch it again at some point. Give it a few years so I forget it, and then, give it another try. So I landed on a 3. Overall, nothing amazing, not really my genre, but a good little story.
Yeah, I get that, and certainly not my genre either. I've never been a big fan of the horrors as it is. Usually, I prefer the parodies like Scream or Cabin in the Woods, right? That kind of stuff usually is better for me. But this one was a really unique take at the time, and I think that certainly deserves some credit. I think watching it now, I was able to really enjoy myself still, even knowing what kind of happens. Maybe what took me out of it is some of the later knowledge of what the Saw franchise becomes and going, ooh, I can see how that spawned, this part in 2 or how, is the whole mythology around the Jigsaw character kind of comes to be. I'm not a fan of that, but this one story is such a well-told story. Yeah, there's holes, but you can easily glaze over them. Only if you're really looking with that deep critical eye are you really going to spot a lot of this stuff. So I think it deserves a lot of credit. I think there's a lot of creative, visual, fun stuff in this movie. I land on a 3.5. Again, it's not going to blow you out of the water nowadays, But if you do kind of remember that sense before torture porn or gore porn or whatever you want to call it became a thing, this was a very unique movie that did some truly daring steps. Again, even though it didn't go very gory, it did make entertaining thriller. I guess thriller is still probably, you're right, the best description for it.
I feel like it falls into the thriller realm for me, I guess.
Before it got into the horror. So yeah, 3.5 for me, and I think that's a pretty fair score. I will say, again, I'm going to recommend this. If you haven't seen it in a while, go and give it a watch. You're going to have a good time for the most part, as long as this is something that's up your alley.
Absolutely. So, a 3 from me, a 3.5 from Scott. Does it hold up? Yeah.
Enough. It holds up enough. All right, guys. Thank you very much for joining us once more on Does It Hold Up as we looked at Saw this week. I've been Scott Mason.
And I've been Edgard.
Thank you for listening. Let us know what you guys thought of this episode somewhere on the internet. We'll leave all our links in the description below, and we'll see you next week.